Hello, humans. Welcome back to another video. So, it's been 4.5 years since I first published a video about this game, and I'm really excited to bring it back. This is Dark Deity 2 this time, and just like the first time around, we have Chip, who is the lead developer on Dark Deity 2, here to talk with me and all of you guys about their exciting game that should be coming out sometime soon. How you doing, Chip?
I am doing fabulous. How are you?
I'm doing great. Man, it feels like just yesterday that we sat down. It was like right in the middle of COVID, 2020. Yeah. Like, what happened? Where did these 4.5 years go? What have you guys been up
to? If you find the answer, you let me know, because it does not feel like, it's been 4.5 years. God,
I know, it's crazy. I looked at the date, and it was like September 2020, and I was like, really?
Yeah,
was it really that long ago?
That hurts to hear, honestly.
I know.
That's crazy.
I know, but here we are. You guys are getting ready to launch your second game. I guess
Indeed.
The first thing that anyone really opens with is like, what's changed? What have you guys learned? Why should we come back for round 2? What have you got for us?
Yeah. So I'll try to take that bite-sized at a time. I think the best way to start having that conversation is just to talk about the fact that we always acknowledge that, Dark Deity 1 had shortcomings. I think it had strengths, but we failed to execute on a lot of the different pieces of the game that we wanted to. And rather than try to take the sort of husk of that game and rebuild it, rework it for 2, the reason it's taken so long is that I completely scrapped the engine and we went back to the drawing board for the class trees, for how the story is going to look, the continent that it takes place on, and more importantly, the code base. So there isn't anything remaining in Dark Deity 2 that is of Dark Deity 1, besides some of the lore. Well, much of the lore, but it is truly a re-envisioning. It's completely built from the ground up. It's not just, retreading old ground. We built a ton of new stuff for it. So I think that's the biggest, easiest way to answer it for people who are familiar with the first game and, followed along maybe 4.5 years ago. That, we didn't rest on the laurels of 1 doing okay. I really wanted to take all the experience of the first game, and we can get, into more the nitty-gritty of exactly the things that I learned. Although we might be here for 3 days doing that.
I'm off for the weekend, I'm just saying,
That sounds so lovely. If I weren't maniacally chasing down bugs, I might take you up on that.
Maybe after all is said and done.
Yeah, that would be a fun one.
So I was there throughout Dark Deity 1. I was one of the first people to sit down and play it. I think I finished it in 3 days. I had so much fun with it. And no doubt, everything you're saying is true. It was rough. You guys were developing your very first game. You really didn't know any better. You were putting stuff out there. And I think you did succeed in making a entertaining game to play. And now you've reached level 2. And so I would love to hear about maybe 1 or 2 of your favorite and most drastic changes that you think are going to elevate this game and really differentiate it from where you were and where you are now?
That is a fabulous question. Okay. The biggest changes that are going to differentiate. So I think I probably would want to talk about the ability system for that.
Sure.
And
let's do it.
How it interfaces. So for those who don't know, in Dark Deity 1, we had a stat called Mastery, which even to this day, I have a hard time explaining exactly what it did, but on a very simple level, it was like an armor penetration stat, and the better your matchup of damage type to armor type was, the more benefit you got from it. So it was super complex. You could not do that math on the fly, which was, not ideal. But I think it was a fun idea, right? Take this to have this stat Mastery that is an indicator of how in tune with the class is this character? How, to use the term that it comes from, how much mastery do they have over their skills. And it didn't really hit with the first game because it was so complicated, and it was also the way that it was interactive just didn't feel great. And so when we were in the early stages for Dark Deity 2, thinking about what we really want to do with the game, because there was so much more, we had the idea to tie mastery to ability usage. And, abilities went through so many changes early on in development with the scope of it, how many did we want them to have, how impactful were they. And we landed on what I think is an incredibly interesting mix where all characters are going to be using abilities, not constantly necessarily, but, a pretty strong amount of the time, all your characters are using abilities, regardless of if they have mastery or not. But the way that they go about being built, the way that you go about building a team and equipping these characters, it changes so much their in-level interactions, right? Because in these kinds of games, combat is always king. And we didn't necessarily want to move too far away from that and make every single interaction about which tool are you going into the kit to grab. We still wanted to keep some of what makes them simple and fun and engaging for the last, 30 years that people have been making these games. Whenever early Shining Force was coming out. We wanted to keep the spirit of that people love, but add on top and add ways to enhance that and interact with that. And what I think we ended up with is a really interesting spectrum of units where, depending on what class they're in and depending on how much mastery they have, they're going to be more or less buoyed by their abilities, and other units might interact with them differently. Realize I'm rambling, and this is probably not the most coherent way to get about this, but the long and short of it is, I think we've landed in one of the more fun, replayable scenarios and toolkits that I've seen myself in a game like this, where people are getting through their playthrough of the game, and they're excited to end the story. They're, rushing through the end, but they're not rushing through the end to finish the game. I've had this message countless times now. People will hit the later stages of the game, and once they've seen the whole toolkit, they come to me and they're like, I cannot wait to start my second playthrough. I'm so juiced to get another crack at these tools and try a new set of builds because it's so impactful.
Because now they know the truth and they want to exploit that, right?
Partially, actually, but what I've been seeing more is that some of the more easily exploited builds, which we've been sort of slowly rooting out, are the ones that you do on a first playthrough because you see it and it looks strong. And then once the toolkit's had some time to marinate, you start thinking about the classes that you didn't use. You start thinking about the combos of old Tier 2 abilities that you didn't have on your Tier 3. And there's so much interactivity between the class passives, the class abilities, the runes, the rings. There are a hilarious amount of ways to build. And while that was true in the first game, because the underlying class system is the same, you have your 4 Tier 2s, take it into any 4 Tier 3s, not crazy complex. The extent to which those changes affect your moment-to-moment decisions in combat is so much greater. And it makes the choices feel more impactful. It makes them more impactful, but it makes them feel significantly more impactful in a way that I think is fresh and really fun.
Which, honestly, we already got to feel some of that because you guys did something different this time around than the first time. You were kind of keeping it secret and under wraps and you didn't want to reveal too much. But this time you guys came out guns blazing. You're like, here you go. Here is a multi-chapter demo that can go on for unlimited amount of time. Take as much time as you want to clear the content in this demo. Mm-hmm. And so, for example, mine was 5 hours. That's how long I spent because there was just so much. And you guys did something nice in that you unlocked more than would be normally available if you were playing a normal playthrough for the game. So we were a little bit spoiled in that we got to explore a lot of these new mechanics, the class system, the equipment, the abilities, like you were saying. And I had a riot using these abilities. I mean, I was there with decision paralysis for like an hour, trying to figure out like, okay, how am I going to spec my units in a way that they're all going to synergize? And I think we had like 8 units or 9 units in chapter 3. And I had to think about, okay, I want to split them into 2 teams. And how am I going to make 2 cohesive teams that can operate individually so that I can go down the 2 separate ways, but also have them be investments for the future as like a group of units that are going to work well together. And I think you guys put a lot of thought into that. In addition to all the extra. There's a lot of strategy still in there, but you've lent a lot more into the RPG system here.
Yeah.
And so what was the decision behind that? You went into like mana and more into equipment and like accessories and speccing out all your weapons. Like we had the basic speccing out of weapons in the original game, but you guys went a lot deeper this time.
Yeah. I think I do, and there will be people I think that miss the weapon system of Dark Deity 1, where you had your 4 on at any time and you picked sort of the best one for the scenario and you upgraded them. But in terms of like true build variety and how you're interacting with the level, it usually came down to let me tab through all 4 options and see which one is best and then click it. It wasn't an active decision process. It was just like, to some degree, I think tedium. Interesting tedium that could be fun at times, but in the grand scheme of things, I don't think we executed super well on that. And I think following a lot of the ways in which we maybe missed the mark with customization in 1, if you look back at the eternal aspects, they actually a lot of the effects of the rings in Dark Deity 2 are eternal aspects or modified ones, or they're passives from characters in the first game. Not too many of them, but we have some sort of referential ones looking back. We had a lot of the same effects, but without the mana system and without the ability system, they weren't impacting your moment-to-moment decisions nearly as much as we wanted them to. So you have this crazy suite of customization, but it doesn't really matter if you don't have to use it or engage with it. And I think that was the problem that we ran into and we really wanted to address in this game. We wanted it to not be possible to beat the game if you're not using the abilities, if you're not, actively expending mana, and really sort of just bring up the in-level interactivity a lot.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense, and I'm glad you did, honestly, because again, while it can be overwhelming that early, and I know the actual introduction is going to be quite slow, but it does give you something to sort of plan for and build on throughout the entire game, and I'm excited for that. I only saw the Tier 2 classes, and those were crazy as is, so I can't wait to see the Tier 3 ones. I know you've been dying to share them, and I've been very anti-spoiler. I'm like, no.
Yeah.
Let me experience this fresh.
We have some wild stuff. But yeah, we had someone actually an hour or 2 ago promoted into one of the Summoner Tree Tier 3s and just was like, I think in awe of some of the Tier 3 animations. I won't get too far into it, but some of them are like jaw on the floor when you first see it. And I think that's part of the magic of spending 20 hours with a cast, or however long it takes to get to Tier 3. This game's a little bit longer than the first one.
Good.
And then you get there and you upgrade and you're like, man, I was really liking these Tier 2s, and then the next tier is just in a completely different stratosphere. I think it's really fun.
I agree. I think one of the hands down unanimous feedbacks that were very positive about the first game was how good your animations were. And from what I've seen, they've leveled up too.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm definitely looking forward to seeing all of the animations. I've seen some showcases from a couple of the animators that were working on it with you guys. So big shout outs to them. Also old community members that have moved on to help with this project. So
yeah,
very, very thankful and very nice to see how this group gets to stick together and continue to elevate its skill set and the performance. It's great to see something like this.
That's one of the things that I actually really truly have loved in the process of making Dark Deity 2 is we kept around most of the team for Dark Deity 2 worked on the first game, and so beyond them just being fantastic artists who I really appreciate and admire, their skills have grown too, because you only get so much time to do hobbyist work of this kind. But when it's, hey, let's go in and make a spread of 45 player classes, 25 enemy classes, and animate them all, it's just such a larger animation load when it's not done in the free time. And I think with a couple artists in particular, I've gotten to watch their skills really, really blossom and grow and start making mind-blowing stuff. And I have a bit of a penchant for having weird, animations and class designs. I like to make stuff that's a little bit out there, and getting to adapt with these artists and watch them put out animations where, like there's one that we show off a fair amount with the Juggernaut where it throws up the shield into the air and then hits it like a baseball at the enemy and then follows it up. It's sort of wacky, unrealistic, fun stuff like that. We have a bunch of those in the animations where we exit the realm of this makes sense and stay firmly in the fuck it, it's cool, let's do it.
It's a fantasy game. I mean, this is, and I really didn't want to draw comparisons with Fire Emblem this time around, but honestly, whenever I think about 2D sprite animations, I always go back to like the Fire Emblem 7 core, the Game Boy Advance Fire Emblem. Those animations were fun. Like, that's what you want to see. You want to see those like wacky animations. It's a fantasy game. There's magic. There's monsters. Who cares if it's realistic,
Yeah.
It's just so much fun to see that, and it excites you as a player to keep seeing those animations over and over again, as opposed to a realistic, I can take 2 steps and jab you with my lance kind of thing. Like, okay, I can only watch that so many times.
I know, that's why you end up turning animations off in most other games of this type. And I will say, I'm a huge animation off believer. I still have yet to turn them off for Dark Deity 2, despite, probably thousands of hours of playing it at this point.
That's great to hear,
because I just
honestly.
love them. Also, we have a fast forward this time, so that helps.
True.
But yeah, beside the point, it is, I think, to some degree, modern gaming has lost some of that charm where it's so hard in 3D to make someone do something goofy and unrealistic and make it look good, because we have such a stronger attachment to that doesn't look right, that's unnatural. But with the 2D sprites, it's all fair game. You can make them do basically anything and not have, uncanny valley feels coming into it. And so that's part of what I really love about making 2D games.
Speaking of 2D, I don't know if you remember this. I remember it clearly because I think it was hilarious. But the first time we talked and did this interview together, I used a certain thumbnail, and that thumbnail got blocked. Do you remember this?
It was Sloan, right?
It was Sloan, yeah, and YouTube blocked it. And it was a whole thing for you guys anyways, which was, it ended up being like a little funny thing for me.
It was.
Is Sloan coming back?
Sloan is not in Dark Deity 2, no.
No, that's my favorite character. I need Sloan. Like, I can't not have Sloan for my thumbnails.
That is tough, but there's other good thumbnail characters, if you will.
Okay. I'm going to get an alternative that'll get me blocked off on YouTube.
I don't think you're going to get an alternative that'll get you blocked on YouTube. I think that we caught the message from that loud and clear. That was a bit of a misstep in the first game's development. But again, I've been really, really, really committed to really opening and listening, what do people think about the game? What do they like? What do they not like? And so I've kind of dropped any and all ego that I possibly can and take all feedback with, this is worth listening to. Which, would have been my attempt the first go around, but we just didn't show the game to anyone. So, but that feedback, told us something valuable, which is, let's not make characters that are this heinously designed.
As much as I love it, honestly, like I at heart, we all have a little bit of degeneracy deep down, like you want to use it for the fan service. You want it to be there just because you can, and it's ridiculous. But I guess even YouTube drew the line at that and said, Linking, you're fired. Like, you can't have this.
Yeah, I'm glad we changed that design. She looked better with the dress after anyway. There were like character development reasons that we don't need to get into this loan thing, but yeah, the designs I think are in a better space now by and large.
Great. Yeah, that's fantastic. Sorry, it was just like something that dawned on me right now. I was like,
That's a
drifting,
good
and I was like,
blast
oh,
from the past.
this is like the anniversary of when the only time a thumbnail has ever gotten blocked for me on YouTube. So it was funny. Anyways, let's talk about.
I'm proud of that. I'm not actually proud of
Yeah,
that, but
well, I mean, you did something that is forever ingrained in my memory. But the
we made
entire
an
point of
impact.
this, the entire point of this was to talk about the art direction. And there's two things that I recall. Your original portraits looked fantastic. But I think I like to start with the negatives and then we go for the positives. One of the things I remember was highly criticized, and then you guys went back and revised, was the map art.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me about the map art now, because I've seen it. Not everyone might have seen it, but how proud of it are you where it's at now?
Yeah. I'm really happy with how it turned out. I think map art is one of those things. And I'll just be pretty candid here. As someone who, I don't make the art for the game, so it's not really my place. I had always thought when we were going in that, the map art, that'll be one of the easier things to find. It's environmental art. There's making good looking 2D, like top down tile sets is so hard. And there are very few people who are super, super proficient and, working in a bunch of different color ranges. It's so much harder than I had thought when I was younger. And I've grown to really appreciate, the art that goes into it. And we went through a couple artists with Dark Deity 2, and we went through a couple stages of what it looked like. And even in the beta, it's been improved since then, which I don't know if we've talked about or I told you, but one of the things that was sort of missing was like shadowing, like actual casting shadows from the physical objects, because the players cast shadows, but none of the tile sets did. And I went through and manually added shadows into every single map and scene in the game and everything, so it all feels much more cohesive now. Even since the demo, when I think it looked okay. And yeah, I am really happy about how we handled that. The first game, contextually, the person who did the map art was my college roommate and best friend. He was my best man at the wedding, or at my wedding, a year and a half ago-ish. He had never done any pixel art before. So the fact that, we managed to finish it at all was a miracle. But what we did on the first game, I'm rambling again, but I'll just get through this point. All of the maps were fully illustrated. They weren't done by tile set. We didn't build, sequences of objects to use. And so when it came to the gameplay design, we were on such a tight schedule that once it was drawn, we were locked in. And so a lot of the map designs suffered for it. And so I felt really strongly that we needed to move to using tile sets with Dark Deity 2. And it's made it much, much easier to tweak and make sure the levels are really good, but also there's a level of cohesion to how the different levels feel with the players, and how there's more of a sense of place and consistent sense of place that I think really elevates the world feel of the game.
And that's honestly really reassuring to hear. Like, hearing you go through like, oh, shadows, like, honestly, I didn't even notice, but I'm sure a lot of people would. And then when it's there, it'll make a difference. But then you also said the magic word, which is map design. And whenever someone says map design, I have this like internal PTSD like reaction from inside me. And I go like, map design. So with map design, I've always been a firm believer in the fact that you need to have multiple objectives, different ways to clear the main objective. You need to have optional stuff, and it needs to be constantly having that feeling of movement and pressure. Otherwise, a map stagnates.
You have come to the right place, my friend.
Great. Fantastic. So give me one of your, if you can, if you're allowed to, give me a map objective that you are really excited for people to experience.
That is a good question. Give me a sec to think. Almost all 30 maps have explicit side objectives that give you loot. And so there's kind of a lot to pick from. I'm going to actually go into the bag of... I don't know if we've talked about challenges in the past, but there's one that I really adore that I think does a good job of illustrating how we were a little more willing to get out of the box with this game. So around chapter... I should know when it is, but it's been a long day already. let's say chapter 7, you'll start getting periodically challenge maps that you can go through, and it'll give you, a cool weapon or a couple of runes or a piece of loot. They're smaller, and you can only take 6 units into them. And one of the challenges in the game is called Challenge Gardening. And
okay.
You're in sort of a town square area with a park in the middle. And you have to fight off waves of reinforcements while you set some of your units to pulling weeds in the garden. And it creates a sort of a fun, okay, who can I expend for this turn? What's the most efficient way to take care of these reinforcements that are coming in? And it's sort of like a little bit more mobile defend map. And I guess to sort of tie this back into the question, this was not the right example to use as I'm sitting here thinking about this. I'll give another one in a sec, but treat this as news about the challenges existing.
That is very interesting. I did not know that or expect that, but that sounds like fun. It's kind of like a bonus chapter, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. There's those, and then there's there's training missions if you want to you can spend some gold to go in and beat up enemies for XP.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we tried to be unafraid to sort of create more goofy interactive elements in the levels. There's fewer that are strictly a defend or strictly one thing. I like to think that most of the levels, by virtue of their side objectives or exactly how you get around the map, there's a level where you have to jump from ship to ship. I've just exposed the ship level. Excuse me.
Oh no, the boat map.
Yes, there must be a boat map. It's a must. I love boat maps. I'm just gonna say it. I'll just out myself as a boat map lover there.
That's a contentious topic right there.
I know it is, but
hey, if you guys have a good boat map, then maybe it'll change people's minds.
We'll see about that. But said boat map, right? It's technically a defeat boss, but the way that you go about doing that is so different from any of the other maps in the game where you're just asked to, quote unquote, defeat boss. I think those are the gray areas that we really wanted to execute on, because the first game, I think I was in this place with the initial level designing where I wanted all the maps to have crazy designs, do sort of put them in wild situations, but then they all turned into route maps because, what do you do in any crazy situation? You still have to just kill all the enemies.
Yeah.
And so I think we shifted our focus away from gimmick and a little more towards how can we differentiate in the terrain, in the breakdown, in the side objectives, in the enemy positions. Empowerments is one of the things that really helps with that. If you haven't played the demo, there are enemy skills. They are marked, and that can be anything from this unit always double attacks, which is one of the more dangerous ones, to when you kill this unit, it inflicts bleed upon the unit who killed them. Different things that impact beyond just that enemy themselves, how you have to go around playing the map, right? Because if a pack of enemies...
think twice about what you're doing, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the things
you make a move, but it's going to have consequences, and it's pretty much you're basically setting us up for, okay, I can go for this turn, but what is the lingering effect going to be 2, 3, 4 turns down the line to whatever unit I'm using in this situation?
Exactly. And I do think that that's one of the really, really big strengths of the mana system as well. To me, there is a much stronger incentive to think several turns ahead than there normally would be in this game, because, you have to, it's not just about who am I casting this fireball on this turn. It's about, will I have enough mana to cast this utility spell then 2 turns later to take on this next pack? There's a lot more nuance moment to moment with your decision making.
Yeah. So tell me about fatigue. Why fatigue?
Oh, exhaustion on the units after they fight. Yeah. So it's sort of a roundabout way to handle dodge tanking. Another thing, so let's tie this into Dark Deity 1 because it is in essence very important as to why we made the decision to include exhaustion. For reference, exhaustion in Dark Deity 2 is a mechanic where every time a unit fights in combat, they lose 15 dodge until the next phase starts. So enemy phase, player phase, whatever it is. Every time you fight in the same phase, you lose dodge. And this is a shout out to the Embrace the Fog ROM hack, actually, because that's where the idea was pulled from. Someone had mentioned it to me because they saw it in there. And I was like, man, that's a fabulous mechanic, because what it allows for is dodge tanking can really turn into a juggernauting issue super quickly, right? If the dodge gets high enough, you have an invincible unit, no good, the fun is gone. And that was something that was very possible to do, and even on launch easy to do in Dark Deity 1. But the more you nerf dodge, it's this slippery slope where dodge characters, there's this very thin line where they're properly balanced, and on one side is useless, and on the other side is invincible. And I was having a really hard time figuring out how I wanted to go about balancing that, because I think having a dodge tank is really fun, and it's something that's charming about this genre. What exhaustion allows for is for dodge tanks to be very powerful, right? We can allow them to scale dodge heavily. We can allow them to be functionally invincible for a couple enemies. But if you're trying to juggernaut them against an entire crowd who are all coming to attack, eventually they will be too exhausted to dodge, and they'll start taking damage. So it's sort of a semi-extreme countermeasure to nerf dodge tanks, but in the same vein, it actually buffs dodge tanks because you can reliably count on them to do certain functions in a level, right? And we don't have to try to bring them down and balance them and then have half of them end up bad. We can keep them strong, but just have a sort of an explicit nerf to throwing them into a crowd with reckless abandon. You have to think about how you use them, which is, what you kind of want out of every unit type.
So feeding into that same vein then, do you have something similar for just bulky tanks who are built that way, high defense, high magic defense? And is there something for mage tanks, for example, who might have a lifesteal?
Yeah, so there isn't anything for bulk tanks, but that's primarily because it's nearly impossible to achieve that same level of tankiness that a dodge tank has.
Challenge accepted.
And it will be done, I'm sure. The tool set's crazy. But enemies have a ton of might. And in particular, there's a really even split between physical and magical units. And it's really, really difficult to have high enough defense and fortitude to just be, a bulk demon that you can throw out at any time. It can be done, but it takes more effort. And, exposing them to explicit damage at all times is sort of enough of its own nerf, whereas in the dodge tanking, you're expected to dodge for X amount of times before you take any damage. So I think it's in a healthy place between the two, as is.
Okay, that's honestly good to hear. I think balance is a word that a lot of people throw out in gaming, and it's very difficult to understand how hard it is to balance something until you're in that situation. And so I really don't envy you on trying to create that perfect middle ground, like you were saying, between invincible and useless, while also having to factor in that, hey, this isn't the only class we have to deal with. There's also 40 other classes that we also need to balance at the same time.
Yeah.
How tough is that?
It's impossible is the word I'll use. And at risk of making the process for it sound bad, I don't want the game to be perfectly balanced. This is something that I think some experiences really require to be at their best. Particularly multiplayer video games, you want really good balance. A really tightly tuned tactical scenario might, require tighter balance, but I think it would be stupid of me to create a sandbox where there are literally millions of possible builds and then run around playing whack-a-mole trying to make sure that everything is perfectly in line with power. Some classes are better for some units than others. Some Some units are going to do really well on a map and make it easier, and some are going to struggle. It's one of those things where the things that I'm primarily trying to balance down or change are, one, game-breaking builds that just invalidate the difficulty and make it so easy it's not fun, and stuff that is so bad that it's also not fun to use. Everything else, I think, exists in this sort of middle ground where it might be more powerful than it probably should be in a perfect world, but usually if that's the case, it's really fun to use and you're expending resources to do so. That's, again, one of the strengths of the mana system is if there's an ability that's really, really powerful, you're only using it, every so often, depending on how much mana you have. So it's not... There's sort of a built-in limitation on how much issue we run into with that, if that makes sense. I'm not seeking perfect balance. I'm seeking the most fun scenario that doesn't get crazy out of whack too fast.
And that makes sense. I like the analogy of that there will always be situations that some classes are better than others. And I like the fact that it's not going to be all completely balanced, but as long as it's within, all of them are within like a 15% diameter of each other, kind of like a plus minus 7.5%. I think that's pretty fair. Like every class will have its own niche.
That's a very specific number.
Well, the 15% is stuck in my mind from like I've been following the new GPUs that come out, and the NVIDIA cards are only like 15% better than the last generation, and everyone's going crazy about it.
I actually hadn't heard that. That's funny.
Yeah, so I don't know. The 15% number is very stuck in my mind, but it means nothing. Anyways, I digress. You threw out the word difficulty, and a lot of what I've been doing while we're talking is me listening to you and latching on to some stuff you bring up for like very seamless transitions into speaking topics, and I think it's been working so far. But difficulty. I played the demo on your deity difficulty, which is the hardest difficulty, and it was actually pretty easy. And I think you had come out and said already that we kept it easy just for the fun factor, for the demo.
Yeah.
How hard is your hardest difficulty going to be? Is it genuinely going to challenge the people who want a challenge without fiddling around with the different options? Or am I going to need to delve into that to get that level of challenge that I want?
There's a pretty good chance if you are a genre veteran that you would consider really good at these kinds of games. I think that Deity, which is our higher difficulty, does still lean on the easy side of things. We've been working on making it harder, and it's sort of actively going that way. And we do have some genre veterans that struggle a bit on Deity. One thing that I think important to note, because of the way that team compositions work in this game, some chapters are way harder for one person than another just because they don't have a particular tool in their kit to, invalidate one mechanic or get over X wall in a certain way. It's something that is pretty individual to your experience, which chapters you're going to struggle with, because, again, the toolkit is so powerful and it's so varied from class to class and, which unit you have in those classes. It's a little bit hard to say. If you are the kind of person who seeks out the most broken possible build and will super min-max everything, I think Deity will probably be on the easy side. I think the game is generally built for the systems to be fucked around with and to make fun stuff. And I think this is something I'm keeping an eye on, and, we'll probably buff the difficulty a little more if it's still looking on the easy side. Granted, most of our testers obviously play a lot of strategy RPGs, so it's a delicate thing. But I would say, by virtue also of permadeath not being in the game, it's just inherently a much less punishing experience. So, take with that what you will. I think it is, in general, an easier game than many in the genre.
That's fair. I do like to think about difficulties more of your easy is for people who are genre beginners or people who just want to experience the story without having to think. Your normal being sort of your average Joe who's familiar but not quite a veteran. And then your hard difficulty really should be something aimed at, hey, veterans of the genre, here's what I've got at you. I'm going to flex my muscles at you and challenge me on. But what you guys have also done is you've given us like a plethora of customizable modes.
Mm-hmm.
What do we have to look forward to in terms of customization?
Yeah, so, and I can get kind of specific here because we already have people that are playing on those modes.
Yeah.
So on launch, there may be a couple other things because we're still there's still some time to go after having this conversation. But there is a built-in randomizer for recruitment, which will be popular, and then you can fiddle with player and enemy aptitudes or growths, and you can adjust. Did I say enemy? You can adjust both player and enemy bases and aptitudes/growths. Up to 200%. And then on top of that, there's also a random enemies modifier, which takes sets of enemies in a level and replaces the group of classes with a random one from the sandbox. Excuse me. My cat is outside the office door whacking on the doorknob. I don't know if you can hear that.
I can't hear that, but that's funny.
And then the last thing that I think some people will have fun with, and we have some testers who have been going crazy with this, is Oops All Empowerments mode, which gives every single enemy in the game an empowerment. And so there are some sort of, masochistic difficulty lever experiences that you can create. But I think that they're generally things that are better enjoyed after you've already played through the game. Again, because the game being on the easier side comes by virtue of actually using your abilities and engaging with the kit, I think it's a much more entertaining easy than you would normally expect from this kind of experience. Because if you're making it easy, that means that you're, actively thinking and using the toolbox in interesting ways. And so, again, it's difficulty is a hard one to discuss with this because there are so many options on how to tackle different situations. That I think what a lot of people are going to end up doing is, playing on Deity, enjoying the sandbox, seeing what the different builds can be, and then going and thinking, I wonder just how hard I can make this and still beat it. Because, again, there's so much skill expression in the ability usage. We had someone playing what he coined as max mode, which was 200% enemy and player bases and aptitudes. And then Oops All Empowerments mode. And he was sending me screenshots of these enemies that had like 250 health and like 95 power.
That sounds insane.
Yeah, and he was playing it on relaxed mode, which turns the turn counts off. I don't even know if it's possible with the turn counts on because some of those stats were ridiculous. But again, sort of to speak on it being easy/difficult, I'm pretty sure that you can do almost any level of difficulty with the right setup in the kit. Like, I think people will be able to do 0% aptitudes modes. I think that people are going to beat the game on double enemy bases or double enemy aptitudes.
Someone will figure it out somehow.
Exactly, but I think it takes a level of optimization that for even the average good SRPG player who likes a hard mode, they might not, it might not be fun on a first playthrough when you're just experiencing the systems and going on vibes and all that.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree. So I wanted to ask you about something. And I want you to sit with me here for a second, close your eyes, take a deep breath in, because this is something that's really important to me. On a scale of 1 to 10, how relevant is fire in this game?
Fire enjoyer we have here. I would say it's actually a more complicated question than you might think for a couple reasons that I can't get into.
I see.
I'm gonna say 6.5.
6.5 out of 10. I'll take it.
I think that's probably a healthy spot. Yeah.
Yeah. I think 10 out of 10 fire isn't something you want. It's like sometimes it's a little bit too much destruction. But 6.5 is like a good, it's like a medium well,
That's kind of, I think that's probably where we're sitting at. Although after you clear it, you'll have to remind me that we need to revisit this and see if you agree with my assessment.
Sure, yeah, we can do a follow-up fire assessment. I think.
Although that assessment might change depending on which story choices you make in the game. Just
ooh,
yeah.
you beat me to it. I didn't even get to go there on my list yet. Tell me about the story choices. What are we talking about?
Yeah. A big part of Gwen's journey, your protagonist, who, you make choices on behalf of, is that she is sort of thrust into positions she doesn't want to be in, where she has to make choices that don't really have a right answer. And as you agonize over which choice to make, Gwen sort of does too. And I think that it, in a lot of ways, ties the player more viscerally to the story and to the writing and voice acting, because you get to sort of feel a little bit more of that anguish. But I do want to be pretty clear up front that these aren't enormous route splits that are going to change multiple levels and, get new units from it necessarily. They'll change how a couple levels play, and they'll change, the story, and they'll change the most importantly, the arc that they're in. They have a pretty big impact on. But it's not. I don't want people to come in expecting to make a bunch of choices that end with them having, 20 endings. It is still very much a beginning, middle, and end that is explicitly the same. How you get there changes, and the implications of maybe what happens after might change. But it is still a pretty set story that you have some agency in how you go about impacting different elements.
Okay. That makes sense, and that sounds like a lot of words used to say, "You'll see when you get there," which is something I'm excited about, because I know you don't want to give away like all of these little story twists and how it changes things, because I think that's half the fun is you need to make those decisions and then see what your consequences are for making your decisions. Your choices need to matter. And I do like that. But sort of staying on that same point is, what about these choices that you make? Do you miss out on stuff because of these choices? Do you maybe recruit different characters than you normally would because of these choices? Are there like minor splits within that we can sort of expect that will give me replay value for me to come back and say, you know what, I didn't like this decision. I want to make a different one and get a different outcome here?
Yeah, it leans more towards the latter of what you're saying. There are cases where you might get a unit a little later than you would otherwise. You do recruit all the characters no matter what. There are, some conditional scenes based on different choices you make that might play or might not play. There are chapters that have different objectives, have slightly different layouts. There are big loot differences for the gameplay goblins. There are things you miss out on. But again, it's not. I would say there's replay value. I think people will enjoy going back and picking the different ones and seeing the different outcomes and seeing what happens. But you aren't going to miss out on huge core chunks of the experience. I would say, I think we hit a pretty good middle ground of it's impactful and it's fun to see, but you're not going to sit there and feel like shit that you didn't see the other stuff.
Got it.
Worth going back, playing again, and seeing. That's fun, but it's not so drastic and so different in most cases that it's going to be like feels bad that you made a certain choice.
Which is interesting that you call it that way, or that you guys have done it that way, because I feel like the current generation of gaming has lent away from FOMO. A lot of games just want you to get everything your first run through and not have to come back, and so they make it all it's not exciting. There's no secrets, there's nothing hidden, there's nothing that you can easily miss or skip or whatever. Do you guys have any secrets? Is there anything hidden? Do I need to like overly explore, or will I miss stuff if I don't focus? Like, personally, I love that. I love the fact that I didn't like accomplish a side objective or a series of side objectives, and thus, I mean, you said all the characters are going to be recruitable anyways, but like maybe I missed like a really good item because I didn't follow along with this series of side objectives that are pretty obscure but nice to have.
I don't know that I'd say we have that sort of like cross level, almost like secret quest type thing. There are a variety of hidden secret scenes or interactions that are likely going to be missed by many players because you need to activate them in a particular way. I don't think I can go any more into it than that without causing problems for myself.
Okay. But that makes me feel very good that you can't say that. I've been trying to push and pull and try to get you to tell me, stop, I can't talk about this, and we finally hit that, so I'm glad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that one, that's where, I'm gonna put a sock in it, because...
All right, I'm gonna write that on your... Draws the line at hidden story, 2 out of 10. Okay.
Give me at least a 3 out of 10, come on.
A 3, fine, you know what? We'll bump you up to a 3 just because you asked very nicely. So good. I like to hear that there is stuff that we can miss or not see or not activate, because it means I'm off of my autopilot mode. I don't want to just be like slamming my way through the game and not really paying attention or immersed in the lore or trying to like actually understand what's going on. We need to do that. And
there's lots of reasons to focus on the lore. I think people are going to be pretty invested in that side of things just by how the story goes. I feel pretty good about that.
Good, because one of the things you said when we first started is that the lore remains from the first game. And I was honestly a little bit surprised that you guys went with this angle, because one of the things I was hypercritical about in my review of the first game was the story. Mm-hmm. It was pretty fragmented, quite linear, just rather surface level. And while you guys had this nice world and a little bit of lore in the background, I never expect you to be like, all right, let's run it back. And clearly there's like a pretty large time skip between the first one and the second one. Your main characters had a kid, and even the kid's like pretty old now. So it's like, what, 20, 25 years down the line in the future?
Yeah, 25.
It's fresh start, same world.
Exactly.
Why?
So something, when I say the lore remains, I don't necessarily mean all of the stuff that you found out in the game of 1. We have a hilarious amount of documentation and history and detail to this world that we didn't really do a good job of delivering to the player with the first game. But that doesn't mean that the world itself and the ideas weren't interesting and fun. So you don't like have to play the first game and experience the world to get really any of the lore of the second one. So I think maybe I misspoke on that, because the story could hardly be any more different in context. And it's on a different continent, and very few characters return. It really is brand new for most intents and purposes. But we get to fall back on a lot of the underlying ideas that we didn't get to use for the first game, or that we didn't do a good job of sort of bringing through. I don't think that players of the first game will feel like it feels similar at all. It's a little hard to describe.
It already does feel like a different game. Like, I feel like I'm playing... That's why I was saying, it was odd to me, or I was a little bit surprised that you kept it the same, especially after playing the demo, because if I hadn't played the first game, I wouldn't know that there was a connection here. And I think that's probably kind of healthy for you guys.
That's like what we wanted,
It's like a little bit of an Easter egg sprinkle for the people who have played the first game to be like, oh, wait, that's Benji? Why? Or yay, that's Benji. Like, I missed that guy. That guy was cool.
Yeah.
I know he's your favorite character, so I had to bring him up.
We love Benji.
I know you love Benji. He didn't turn out very good for me in my first run of the original Dark Deity, so he never really stuck.
This is blasphemy, but he's not a great unit.
Well, maybe second time.
Now in Dark Deity 2, that's there's actually okay. I'm gonna. This is first time this is being revealed publicly. You say second time's the charm. There's an achievement if you get level MVP with Benji, that's third time's the charm, because he's Benji the third, because the Benji in Dark Deity 1 was Benji the second. So little tidbit there, unimportant. To answer this question a little bit more fully, because again, I don't want to give the wrong idea about we're bringing back ideas from the first game. It's really just that we're using the world and some of the characters. One of the things that Olivia, who we hired a new writer for this game, I didn't touch the script at all myself, which you'll all be very, very thankful of. And one of the things that I think is incredibly artful that Olivia did with the world and the characters is rather than take flawed characters from the first game, let's talk about Irving, right? The most generic RPG hero in history, right? Extremely boring, extremely vanilla. Rather than take him and recharacterize him and use him in an interesting way that is like counter to that in Dark Deity 2, what we've sort of done with Irving is take a look at the boring generic JRPG hero and say, let's shoot forward 25 years. This guy saved the world. He's famous. How does he do as a father? How does he do as a leader? And take his characterization and then use it in a more complex context. And it creates this really juicy, interesting family dynamic where we get to look at the boring JRPG hero as a middle-aged dad and leader, and he sucks at it, right? Like, it's not something that the throw your sword at the problem guy is good for. And it creates, I think, more realistic dynamics among the cast where you can stay consistent with characterization and sort of draw out a realistic through line with the world of how might this boring character have grown up to become interesting rather than just reforge him as interesting, if that makes sense.
That does make a lot of sense. That actually does. It's like you're kind of, this is what we were working with, but how do we continue to work with it and reshape it when we get further down the line, which I think is an excellent approach. But speaking of that, Chip, I had a very important character to me when I played through the game, the first game.
Uh-huh.
And she's going to be taken away from me this time. I know already. And so having said that, I need you to tell me right now.
Yeah.
You don't have to tell me who it is, but I need you to tell me right now. Do you know who my Dark Deity 2 waifu is?
Who was your Dark Deity 1 waifu?
It was Brooke.
Oh, right. I knew that. She's on all the images, the thumbnails.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if it was Brooke, there is an easy answer to that, but she hasn't been revealed yet. So
wait, you're saying it's an easy answer?
I don't know that I'd go that far because this character is a little bit crazier than Brooke, but that's a good question.
I only ask the best of questions and the hardest of questions.
It's probably Caliph, if anything. We did reveal her, the moon elf.
I'm not a big elf stan, so it'll have to be the personality that sells it. And I like dark hair, generally. So
this is an interesting question that I was not preparing myself to answer. I'm actually going to pull up my folder of characters right now just to stare them down because it's...
Oh, very nice. For people who are listening, we will cut whenever he decides to tell me if he has an answer.
How you feel about half-orcs?
Probably a no. I'm pretty vanilla. I like my humans.
I think I know who it is then, but I'm not going to say the name because...
Okay, you don't have to say the name. It was just something I was curious about. I was like, it's easier to get attached when you've got this, very lovely waifu or husbando or whatever character that you really want to make your beast, so to speak. So, great, fantastic. One last thing I want to ask.
Okay.
And then I think I'm out of stuff to really squeeze here. Actually, I have two things. I want to circle back to the demo. What did you guys appreciate from and learn from when you put out a demo for this game?
Oh my god. Yeah, I've made literally 1,000 changes since then. We got so much good feedback. UI stuff, obviously bug fixing, feature stuff. We learned that some people feel super strongly about the turn limits. I love how the turn limits influence the gameplay of Dark Deity 2. Some people hated them, said, I don't want to buy a game if I have to have turn limits because it stresses me out. So we put in the relaxed mode where you can just turn them off. There was a lot of pushback, interestingly enough, because this is how most of these games work, on the random level ups, right? So we threw in the linear levels mode as a more explicit guideline at the front. That's sort of like grand scale stuff.
That's so interesting that people didn't like the random level ups.
Yeah, you wouldn't think so because it's so normal in the genre, right? But I think Dark Deity has broader appeal than some of the genre because we lean so far into RPG and a little less towards strategy. So we cater to a broader audience, and that's sort of the demo was showing me some of the ways in which I, as a strategy RPG lover, was overlooking different playstyles. And so we added more optionality. We made so many changes to the menus. The tooltip system is infinitely better now. All of the different effects in the game, it'll tell you exactly what it does if you hover something. Because there was a lot of confusion around, like, what the fuck is the difference between lightly and heavily blocking? You know, what is, I'm severely bleeding. What does this mean? And so there's a built-out codex that has all of the effects, but then anytime you hover over a rune or a ring or an ability that has any sort of effect, it'll pop that up.
You know, you just cracked me up because you're like, I'm severely bleeding. What the hell does that mean? And I immediately in my head, I got the picture of Gwyn with like a sword straight through her stomach. She's like sitting in a pool of blood at the ground. And she's looking up at Alden being like, I am severely bleeding. What the hell does that mean? In the most monotone voice.
She would, too. She would take it like a champ and just stand up and keep going. Gwyn is an absolute unit.
She is a tank. She was quite the tanky girl.
I did nerf the shit out of a particular function of hers today, but we don't need to get into that.
No, we don't. We were talking, I think, briefly the other day, and you're like, oh, it's, Gwyn is very tanky, and it'll be very hard to game over. And I was like, I only game over twice this game, and it's because I overextended with Gwyn, and she died. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was funny.
Yeah, she's still, like, if a magical enemy sniffs at her, she's probably gone down. So you have to be careful. But because when she gets a kill, she stacks up block. If you sort of path her right, she can still tank magic enemies. You just can't like throw her out like crazy necessarily. Some people have some builds that have been allowing for that, which again we're taking a look at. But
I think that's what I was tending to lean into in the demo. Obviously, I didn't have the time or the longevity, like the horizontal investment, if you will, to get her to that point. But that's where I was starting to go with her.
Yeah, I think that's what most people will do. It's funny. Almost everyone. The first weapon you get in the game is the longsword, and one of the runes that is in like all the different weapons have their own inventory of runes that are allowed to be applied to them, and the longsword gets the knight rune, which gives you more power depending on how much health you currently have. And I think our testers were 100% of the time putting the knight longsword for Gwyn by like chapter 4.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah, she's just one of those. She has a very clear build path. And she's actually really good in all the other classes too. But there is a pretty obvious, like, good path for her.
Mm-hmm. So we've been talking for an hour and 10 minutes. And I think you and I could probably go for another hour or two just discussing all of the intricacies in the game. But
yeah.
For a couple of reasons, I won't do that. One, we'd spoil too much of the game for the people who are watching, and we don't want to do that, right?
No, we don't.
And then the second reason is like, I don't want to take up too much of your time.
I do got to get back to bug fixing at some point.
Yeah, right. You've got just, slightly more important things to do than sit and talk with me, but I do appreciate it. Yeah. So I will end on one final note, because I will be remiss if I don't ask this question.
Yeah.
People will be mad at me if I don't ask this question. I have established the foundations of my existence based on this question. Are you ready for it?
I'm so ready.
Villains ?
Yes. That's my answer.
Okay.
We do a better
detail.
job. We do a better job than we did in the first. I personally really, really enjoy what we did with them. Testers are, by and large, enjoying it. I'm trying to think. This one's complicated without getting into spoiler territory. I probably should have prepared an answer because I know you love villains, so I should have.
Okay, let me reframe the question then. Let me ask it in a different way, because I think this is a way that I like to categorize my villains.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't answer this, that's also fine. Just say no.
Yeah.
The way I see villains is there's like two different paths. Is this a villain that I'm going to absolutely hate? Like, are they going to make me hate them? Like, they're just, I want to kill this person. Or is this someone I'm going to look at? And when I say I mean like the general public. You always know I'm going to sympathize. Mm-hmm. But is this someone I'm going to look at and be like, you know what? I can see the vision. I can kind of relate. I can get on board with some of the things here. What
Yes.
kind of direction do you feel like you guys have gone?
I agree that those are generally the two paths, and what I'm going to say is that we have both.
Both.
We have both in... we have both. I'm going to leave it at that because I think going beyond that is grounds for giving away too much. But I do think there is some room for simple hatred. Smack the shit out of this dude, and you're thrilled about it. And there is some room for nuance among the cast of villains, shall we say?
Okay. That is an answer I will happily take, because variety is always good, and to just hear that there is, because I think you can have depth in both of these regards, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite villains in the Fire Emblem series, for example, is Valter. Valter is a very simple, I hate your guts.
Yeah.
But it is so effectively done. It is beautifully done.
Mm-hmm.
In a way where when you get to that point, you're just like, oh, let me rip out your throat gladly because you are beautifully written in this way.
Yeah, I think we have some of that, and then I think we have some of the more nuance-bearing kind as well.
Fantastic. That is an answer that is good enough for me. And honestly, Chip, it's been great to sit with you and hang out and talk about this for over an hour.
Yeah, likewise.
I can't wait to get my hands on this game, and maybe I'll finish it in 3 days again like I did with the first one. We'll see if I can get time off or however much time I have to play it.
Yeah.
But it'll be good. It'll be good. I'm
excited to see you get your hands on it and see how you feel.
I have faith
not too
in
far
you
away.
guys. Yeah. I have faith in you guys. I know you've gone through a learning process. I know you guys have come back stronger. The fact that you've brought us a demo shows that you believe in yourselves, but you also trust yourselves to get that feedback and then remodify so many things. There are a lot of stuff that you and I have talked about on the side that we can't talk about in this video here. And so anyone who's still listening this far in, I think these guys are doing a lot of the right things. And I think we should all support and give this a shot. And I'll be there. I'll evaluate everything. There will be a review of this game out as soon as possibly can, but I'm all for you guys. Do you have anything you want to say before we wrap this up?
Well, thank you for the kind words on that. I'm doing my best. It's a small team. I feel really, really strongly for those who are still listening that I want to make good games for you for a long time. And like Linking was saying, it's been a learning process. It's going to be a learning process. I think genuinely, honestly, that Dark Deity 2 is a really good game. I love it when I play it. The testers are loving it generally. I think we've created something special. But I've learned even through making this game probably as much as I learned making the first one. And, whatever my next project's going to be, I would love to keep doing it. So thank you all if you're still listening to this. You all deserve great games, and I'm going to do my best to bring them to you.
All right. Well, I mean, I can't have said it better myself, but let's see. Launch is soon. The game is coming soon, and I'm excited for everyone else to get their hands on it. So thanks once again, Chip, for sitting down with me, and for everyone who's listened this far. Thank you guys for sticking around this long, and hopefully I'll see you guys in another video very soon. Peace.
See you guys.